11 nannies gave up on the Millionaire'S triplets until a black cleaning woman did the impossible. Richard Thompson was at his wit's end. For the 11th time in 3 months, a nanny was hastily packing her bags, abandoning his mansion in Greenwich without even looking back. His 3-year-old triplets had been crying non-stop for 11 straight days. Jake, Peter, and Gabe seemed to have developed a supernatural resistance to sleep, keeping the entire house awake with their desperate screams. The latest nanny, a woman with 15 years of experience and impeccable references, didn't even wait until the end of the month to collect her paycheck. "Mr. Thompson, with all due respect, these children need professional help," she said, dragging her suitcase down the marble hallway. "I've never seen anything like this in my entire career." Richard ran a hand through his graying hair, feeling the weight of his 45 years. Ever since his ex-wife Margaret had left for England a year ago, taking only her clothes and leaving behind a cold letter explaining that she could no longer live in that gilded cage, the boys seemed to have completely lost emotional control. The real estate tycoon had built an empire worth over $200 million, but at that moment, he felt like the biggest failure in the world. His important meetings were constantly interrupted by calls from the housekeeper, Mrs. Henderson, reporting new episodes of the children's despair. That Tuesday morning, after the front door closed behind the resigning nanny, Richard went down to the kitchen for a strong cup of coffee. The sudden silence in the house alarmed him more than the constant screaming. Where were the boys? He rushed up the hardwood stairs, his heart pounding. On the first floor, he found Mrs. Henderson standing at the children's bedroom door, her face filled with disbelief. "What happened?" Richard asked, trying to steady his breath. The housekeeper simply pointed inside the room. Richard stepped closer and saw a sight he would never forget. His 3 sons were nestled in the arms of Constance, the cleaning woman who had worked in the house for 5 years. The 32-year-old woman was softly humming a gentle melody, and for the first time in nearly 2 weeks, the triplets were fast asleep. Constance Williams had arrived that morning for another day of work, as she always did at 7 on the dot. Originally from New Orleans, she had moved to New York City at 18 in search of better opportunities. She had worked as a housekeeper ever since, always with the same quiet dedication that made her beloved in every home she passed through. When she heard the children's cries echoing through the empty halls, her maternal instinct took over. She found the 3 little ones huddled on the bedroom floor, trembling with fear and exhaustion. Without a second thought, she set down her cleaning bucket and comforted them the way she did with her own nieces and nephews back in New Orleans. The song she hummed was a lullaby her grandmother, Miss Dorothy, used to sing to calm the neighborhood children. The simple words and sweet melody had a magical power to soothe even the most troubled hearts. "How did you do this?" Richard whispered, still in disbelief. Constance looked up, her lips still moving in the silent song. "They just needed tenderness, Mr. Thompson. Children can sense when someone's rushed or nervous." Mrs. Henderson huffed, clearly bothered by the situation. "Constance, you have duties to attend to. You weren't hired to do a nanny's job." The scolding made the triplets stir restlessly in Constance's arms. Jake, the most sensitive of the 3, opened his big blue eyes and smiled when he saw the familiar face of the cleaning woman. Peter and Gabe followed their brother's lead, waking up without crying for the first time in days. Richard watched fascinated as his children reacted naturally to Constance's presence. They didn't show fear or discomfort as they had with all the previous nannies. On the contrary, they seemed relaxed and secure. "Daddy," Gabe mumbled, the word almost inaudible. It was the first time one of the children had called him Daddy since Margaret left. Richard felt his eyes well up, but he swallowed the emotion. In the business world, he had learned not to show weakness. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. Constance stood up slowly, careful not to startle the children. "I need to get back to my work, Mr. Richard. The boys are fine now." But when she tried to step away, the 3 little ones began to fuss again. Jake stretched his little arms toward her, while Peter and Gabe pouted, signaling another round of tears. "Wait," Richard said quickly. "How much do you earn here each month?" $2,000, sir. "I'll pay you $4,000 if you agree to take care of the boys too. Constance shook her head firmly. I'm not a nanny, Mr. Richard. I'm a cleaner. Each job has its own responsibilities. The answer irritated the businessman. He was used to solving every problem with money, and this simple woman's refusal completely threw him off. 6,000 then, he insisted, raising his voice. It's not about the money, Constance replied calmly. These children don't need another person passing through their lives. They need someone who'll stay, someone who truly cares. The brutal honesty of her words hit Richard like a punch to the gut. He was offering a fortune, and she was talking about feelings. What kind of world was this where money didn't solve problems? If you refuse, I'll have to let you go, he said, using the authoritative tone that worked in business meetings. The triplets, sensing the tension, began crying again. Constance knelt down and hugged them, whispering words of comfort in their ears. Like magic, they calmed instantly. Mrs. Henderson watched everything with an increasingly stern expression. She had worked for the family for 10 years and had never seen the children react this way to anyone. Not even their own mother, who always seemed distant and formal. Richard, the housekeeper said, pulling him into the hallway, this situation is getting out of hand. You can't let a cleaning lady take care of your children. What will the neighbors think? And your business partners? Richard knew she was right from a social standpoint. Greenwich was a place where appearances mattered as much as money. But when he looked back into the room and saw his children smiling for the first time in months, he felt that maybe social conventions weren't so important after all. Let me think about it, he said, stepping away. In the mahogany office that took up half the mansion's ground floor, Richard tried to focus on the company's financial reports, but the numbers seemed to dance on the computer screen, losing all importance compared to the memory of his children's smiles. He called Dr. Helen Morris, the child psychologist who had seen the triplets a few times after the separation. Maybe she could explain what was happening. Mr. Richard, it's good to hear from you, the professional said. How are the boys doing? That's exactly what I need to talk about. Something strange happened today. Richard recounted the morning's events in detail, from the last nanny's departure to the scene in the bedroom with Constance. Dr. Helen listened quietly, making occasional notes. Richard, may I ask you a personal question? She said when he finished. Of course. What was Margaret's relationship like with the children? The question caught him off guard. Normal, I suppose. She took care of them, bathed them, put them to bed. But was there affection? Spontaneous warmth? Richard fell silent. He tried to recall moments when Margaret had shown genuine love for the children, but his memories were all of mechanical routines, technical care, obligations fulfilled. Margaret was always more practical, he finally admitted. And you? The second question was even harder to answer. Richard realized he spent so little time with his children that he barely knew them as individuals. To him, they were responsibilities to be managed, problems to be solved. I work a lot, he said, aware of how weak the excuse sounded. Richard, young children need emotional connection to develop properly. Your children may be responding to the genuine affection this employee shows them. Are you saying I should hire the cleaning lady as a nanny? I'm saying you should pay attention to what your children are trying to tell you. The conversation stayed in Richard's mind for the rest of the day. During lunch, served at the enormous dining table that could seat 20, he watched closely how the triplets behaved. Mrs. Henderson tried to feed them with the military efficiency she applied to all household tasks. The children ate mechanically, showing no pleasure or interest in the food. The silence was only broken by the housekeeper's curt instructions. Chew properly, Peter. Jake, sit in your chair. Gabe, stop playing with your food. It was when Constance passed by the hallway, pushing the cleaning cart, that the atmosphere changed completely. The three boys waved excitedly, calling out to her. She responded with a warm smile and a few affectionate words in her Cajun accent, making them laugh heartily. Mrs. Henderson shot a disapproving look at the cleaner. Constance, the children are having lunch. This is no time for games. The smiles vanished from the triplets' faces instantly. They returned to eating in silence, but Richard could see their little eyes following Constance until she disappeared down the hall. That afternoon, Richard had an important video conference with Japanese investors. He had locked his office door and asked not to be disturbed for any reason. Business was going well, and there was potential to expand into the Asian market. Then he heard screams coming from upstairs. At first he tried to ignore them, focusing on the profit charts in his presentation. But the crying grew so intense that the executives on the other side of the world began asking about the noise. "My apologies, gentlemen. A minor household issue," Richard said, forcing a professional smile. Mrs. Henderson appeared at his office door, looking desperate. "Richard, I need to speak with you. It's urgent. I'm in a meeting. Can it wait?" "The children won't stop crying. They want Constance, but she's already left. I don't know what else to do." Richard looked at his computer screen, where 6 important executives waited for his response about a $50 million investment. Then he looked up at the ceiling, from where the desperate cries of his children echoed. "Gentlemen, I'll need to reschedule our meeting," he said, shutting the computer before they could protest. He took the stairs 2 at a time, finding the triplets clinging to their crib rails, their little faces red from crying. When they saw him, they stretched their arms toward him. "Daddy, where's Auntie Connie?" Peter asked, using the affectionate nickname they'd given the cleaner. Richard felt a pang in his chest. His own children had never shown as much need for him as they did for a housekeeper they'd only known for a few hours of close interaction. He picked Jake up, and the other 2 immediately stopped crying, waiting their turn to be comforted. But Richard realized he didn't know how to calm them. He didn't know the songs they liked, the games they preferred, or how to connect with them emotionally. "Mrs. Henderson, where does Constance live?" he asked, still holding all 3 children. "In Brooklyn, sir, but she doesn't have a phone." "Do you have the address?" "I do, but get the children ready. We're going there." The housekeeper looked at him as if he'd lost his mind. "Richard, you can't just show up at an employee's house unannounced, and with the children—" "I can, and I will," he said, with the same determination he used to close million-dollar deals. The drive to Brooklyn on that Tuesday evening was eye-opening for Richard. Steering his armored Mercedes through the bustling streets of New York City, with his 3 kids in the back seat, he realized just how disconnected he was from the reality of the city. The triplets pressed their noses to the window, fascinated by the street life, the vendors, and the colorful houses so different from their mansion in Greenwich. To them, it was practically an expedition to a new world. "Daddy, where does Auntie Connie live?" asked Gabe, the most curious of the 3. "In a house very different from ours," Richard replied, starting to wonder if that difference was exactly what his children were craving. The address Mrs. Henderson had given led Richard to a narrow street lined with well-kept old townhouses. The contrast with Greenwich's opulence was stark, but there was something warm about this neighborhood that his mansion had never managed to convey. Constance lived on the ground floor of a light blue townhouse with a small porch decorated with potted plants. Richard parked his imported car, which stood out awkwardly, and unbuckled the children from their seats. "Auntie Connie!" the 3 shouted in unison when they saw the housekeeper watering the plants on the porch. Constance nearly dropped the watering can when she spotted them. She was wearing a simple dress and sandals, her hair loose over her shoulders. She looked younger and more relaxed outside the formal setting of the mansion. "Mr. Thompson, what are you doing here?" she asked, clearly flustered. "The children wouldn't stop crying after you left. They wanted to see you." The triplets ran toward her, hugging her legs eagerly. Constance crouched down to greet them, and Richard saw the same tenderness in her eyes that he'd noticed earlier that morning. "You can't just come here like this alone," she said, worried. "What if something happens?" "Nothing will happen," Richard replied. "May I come in?" Constance hesitated. Her home was simple, furnished with basics and decorated with family photos and Cajun crafts, the complete opposite of the luxury in Greenwich. "The house is humble, Mr. Thompson." "It doesn't matter. Please." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. The inside of Constance's home was small, but impeccably clean and tidy. The living room had a 2-seater sofa, an old television, and a shelf filled with books and Cajun music records. The walls were decorated with photos of smiling children and paintings of coastal landscapes from the northeast. The triplets spread out through the house as if exploring an amusement park. They touched the items on the shelf, flipped through picture books, and laughed at the photographs. It was the first time Richard had seen them so at ease in a place other than their own room. "Sorry about the mess they're making," said Richard, trying to pick up the toys Jake had scattered across the floor. "Leave it, Mr. Thompson. Kids need to move around, explore. That's how they learn." Constance went to the kitchen and returned with a glass of water and homemade cookies for the children. They ate happily, smudging their faces and laughing with each other. It was completely different from the behavior Richard observed during formal meals at home. "Constance, can I ask you something personal?" said Richard, sitting on the edge of the couch. "Of course, sir." "Do you have children?" The smile faded slightly from her face. "No, Mr. Thompson. I never had the chance to marry and start a family, but I helped raise my nephews in New Orleans. My sister's children, she passed when they were little." "And where are they now?" "With my mother, in Louisiana. I send money every month to help with their schooling." Richard realized he was looking at a woman who had sacrificed her own family life to care for others. First her orphaned nephews, now working in strangers' homes to support the family she left behind. "Why did you come to New York City?" "The pay is better here. In New Orleans, I couldn't save enough to send home. My mother's elderly now. She can't work anymore." The conversation was interrupted by Gabe, who brought over a photo album to show his father. The pictures showed Constance at different stages of her life: a smiling child at the beach, a teenager at graduation, a young woman hugging 3 little boys. "Are these your nephews?" asked Richard, pointing at the photo. "Yes, Matthew is 15 now, Mark is 13, and Marcel is 12, all in school, thank God." "How long has it been since you've seen them?" 2 years. The last time I went to New Orleans was Christmas 2022. Richard looked at his own children, playing happily on the simple living room floor, and felt a deep shame. Constance had given up being close to the children she loved to work in homes where she wasn't even treated like a person. And he, who had his children within reach every day, barely knew them. "Constance, I want to propose something different," he said, choosing his words carefully. "What if you came to live in my house? You'd have your own room, double the salary, and you could bring your nephews to visit whenever you wanted." She shook her head immediately. "I can't, Mr. Thompson. I'm not a nanny, I've explained that." "I'm not asking you to be a nanny, I'm asking you to be their friend, to give them the affection I don't know how to give." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. Richard Thompson, the arrogant millionaire who treated employees like objects, was sitting in her humble living room, admitting his shortcomings as a father. "Mr. Thompson, these children don't need a stranger living in their home. They need their father present." "I don't know how to be present, I never learned." "Then learn. They'll teach you, if you let them." Constance stood and walked over to Peter, who was trying to put together a puzzle on the floor. She sat beside him and began helping, speaking softly about the pieces and colors. Richard watched, fascinated, as she held the child's attention effortlessly, gently guiding him. "Let me tell you something, Mr. Thompson," she said, still working on the puzzle. "When I first came to New York City, I worked in a house where the lady of the house never spoke to her children. She gave orders to the nanny took care of the kids, and she only showed up to scold when something went wrong. What happened? The children grew up calling the nanny Mom. The lady was furious. She fired the nanny, but the damage was done. Her kids had no connection to her at all." The story hit Richard like a perfectly aimed arrow. It was exactly what was happening with his own children. They were connecting with Constance because she offered something he didn't know how to give: genuine attention. "How do I change this?" he asked with a vulnerability he had never shown before. "Start small, sit on the floor with them, ask about their day, tell a bedtime story. Kids don't need much, they just need to know they matter to you." At that moment, Jake brought over a children's book and climbed onto Richard's lap. It was a simple book, with colorful drawings and few words. Richard had never read a story to his children before. "Want me to do it?" Constance offered. "No, I want to try." Richard's voice trembled slightly as he read the story of a duckling searching for its family. Jake rested his head against his father's chest, and Peter and Gabe moved closer to listen too. For the first time, Richard felt like he was truly present with his kids. When he finished the story, Gabe clapped his hands and asked for another. Richard looked at Constance, who smiled approvingly. "See? It's not so hard," she said. It was already dark when Richard finally got ready to head home. The triplets didn't want to leave, but Constance promised she'd see them the next day. They said goodbye with tight hugs and kisses on the cheeks. "Constance," Richard said before leaving, "thank you for today, for showing me the kind of father I've been. You're not a bad father, Mr. Thompson. You're just lost. It happens to a lot of people." On the drive back to Greenwich, Richard drove in silence while the kids dozed in the back seat. For the first time in months, they seemed truly at peace, and for the first time in years he found himself questioning whether all his financial success was worth it if it meant losing what mattered most. When he got home, he found Mrs. Henderson waiting at the door with a disapproving look. "Richard, where were you? I was worried, and Dr. Helen has been on the phone for half an hour trying to reach you." Richard settled the kids into their cribs. They were so tired they didn't even wake up, and went downstairs to take the psychologist's call. "Dr. Thompson, sorry to call so late, but I've been thinking about our conversation this morning. I'd like to propose a more detailed evaluation of the children. I think there may be developmental issues we need to address." "What kind of issues?" "Possible speech delays, socialization difficulties, separation anxiety. Behaviors that could be related to the trauma of their parents' separation." Richard felt a knot in his stomach. Trauma? Little ones don't understand separation like adults do. To them, when one parent leaves, there's always the fear the other might disappear too. That can lead to challenging behaviors, like the ones you described. "And how is that resolved?" "With stability, routine, and most of all, consistent emotional presence. The children need to feel safe to start developing normally again." After hanging up, Richard stood in his office for a long time. He looked at the photos on the wall, accepting awards, launching projects, closing big deals. Not a single picture of his kids. He walked to the shelf and picked up a frame that had been turned face down. It was a family photo taken the last Christmas they'd spent together. Margaret was forcing a smile. He was looking at his phone, and the triplets seemed lost among all the expensive, meaningless gifts. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He wandered through the enormous house, noticing how cold and impersonal it felt. Every room looked like a magazine showroom, lifeless, without history, without love. He passed the children's room and heard them whispering softly to each other. He approached the slightly open door and heard, "Is Auntie Connie coming back tomorrow?" asked Peter. "I think so," Jake replied. "She said she would." "I like when she sings," sighed Gabe. "Me too. She's better than the other aunts." "Much better," the other two agreed. Richard felt his heart tighten. His 3-year-old children already knew how to tell the difference between those who truly cared for them and those who were just fulfilling professional duties. The next morning, Richard was in the kitchen at 7 o'clock, waiting for Constance to arrive. He had spent the night researching child development, separation trauma, and nurturing parenting methods. For the first time in years, he had used his free time to study something unrelated to business. When Constance came through the back door, as she always did, she found Richard sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee in his hands and deep, dark circles under his eyes. "Good morning, Mr. Richard. Didn't you sleep well?" "Constance, I need to talk to you. It's important." She hung her bag on the hook near the door and approached, concerned. "Did something happen to the children?" "No, something happened to me." Richard told her about his conversation with the psychologist, his late-night research, and the conversation he had overheard between his children. Constance listened quietly, nodding in understanding from time to time. "I want to learn," he finally said. "I want to learn how to be a real father, but I need help." "Mr. Richard, that's beautiful to hear, but I can't teach what I don't know. I've never been a mother." "But you know how to love. I saw that yesterday. You know how to give affection without expecting anything in return. I don't know how to do that." Constance was silent for a moment, nervously fiddling with her bag strap. "Can I be honest with you? Please?" Those children have been suffering for a long time. It's not just the absence of their mother. It's the lack of warmth in this house. Everything here is beautiful, expensive, but it has no soul. I know. I realized that yesterday at your place. In my home, there's little of everything, but there's a lot of love. Here, there's plenty of everything, but the most important thing is missing. How do I change that? Constance looked around the enormous kitchen with its state-of-the-art appliances and imported marble countertops. Start by turning this house into a real home. Let the children live here, not just exist. What does that mean? Let them make a mess while playing. Let them run down the hallways. Have meals at the kitchen table, not in that dining room that looks like a museum. Put their pictures on the walls, not just work trophies. Just then, the triplets appeared in the kitchen in their pajamas, their hair still messy from sleep. When they saw Constance, they ran to hug her excitedly. "Auntie Connie, you're back," Peter shouted, clinging to her leg. "Of course I came back, I promised, didn't I?" Richard watched the scene with an involuntary smile. There was something magical about the way Constance interacted with the children. It wasn't forced. It didn't follow any parenting manuals. It was natural, spontaneous, real. "Good morning, Daddy," Jake said, timidly approaching him. "Good morning, son," Richard replied, lifting the boy into his arms. "Did you sleep well?" "I did. I dreamed about Auntie Connie's house." "That's great. Tell me about your dream." As Jake excitedly described his dream of a house full of playing children, Richard realized this was probably the longest conversation he'd ever had with one of his sons. And it was far more interesting than any financial report. Mrs. Henderson appeared in the kitchen with her usual disapproving expression. "Richard, the children shouldn't be here in their pajamas, and you have a meeting at 9. "Cancel the meeting," Richard said, not taking his eyes off his son. "Cancel? But it's with the investors for the Miami Beach project." "I said to cancel. We'll reschedule for tomorrow." The housekeeper was stunned. In 10 years working for Richard, she had never seen him cancel a business meeting because of the children. Constance also seemed surprised, but there was approval in her eyes. "Mr. Thompson, if you really want to learn, why not start now?" "How?" "Have breakfast with them. Here in the kitchen, not the dining room. Ask what they want to eat. Let them help prepare it." The idea of cooking frightened Richard. He hadn't stepped into a kitchen to cook since he was a teenager. He always had staff or restaurants handling his meals. "I don't know how to cook." "Neither do they. You'll learn together." What followed was one of the most fun and chaotic mornings of Richard's life. With Constance discreetly guiding them, he helped the triplets make pancakes. More flour ended up on the floor than in the bowl, more milk was spilled on the counter than used in the recipe, and the final result was far from perfect. But the laughter echoing through the kitchen that morning was a sound the mansion hadn't heard in a long time. The boys got covered in sugar, stained their clothes with chocolate, and laughed until their stomachs hurt when the first pancake accidentally stuck to the ceiling. "Daddy, you're funny," said Gabe, his face smeared with flour. Richard felt an emotion he couldn't name. It wasn't professional pride, nor financial satisfaction. It was something much deeper and truer. "Mr. Thompson," Constance whispered, wiping Peter's face with a damp cloth. "Do you see how easy it is?" "Easy and hard at the same time," he replied, trying to brush flour out of his own hair. "Hard how?" "Because I realize how much time I've wasted. How many moments like this I let slip by." "Don't think about the lost time. Think about the time you still have ahead." That afternoon, Richard did something unprecedented. He took his children to the park. Not the fancy private park in the gated community, but Central Park, full of other kids, popcorn vendors, and ordinary families enjoying the day. The triplets were fascinated by the crowds, the ducks in the pond, the other boys playing in the sand. It was a world completely different from the isolated bubble they lived in. "Daddy, can I play with those boys?" asked Jake, pointing to a group of children playing tag. Richard hesitated. What if they got hurt? What if there was danger? What if those kids weren't suitable for a Millionaire'S children? Then he remembered Constance's words about letting them truly live. "Of course. But stay where I can see you." Watching his children play freely with others was a revelation for Richard. They weren't different, special, or superior. They were just three three-year-old boys wanting to have fun and make friends. A mother approached him on the bench where he sat. "Your children are adorable, are they twins?" "Triplets," Richard replied, smiling. "Oh my, that must be a handful. Do you have help at home?" "I do, but I'm learning to do some things myself. That's so important. My husband travels a lot for work, and when he comes back, sometimes it's like he doesn't even know the kids anymore." The casual chat with a stranger made Richard realize he wasn't the only father struggling to balance work and family, but he also saw that many men managed to find that balance, while he had simply chosen not to try. When they returned home that evening, the triplets were dirty, tired, and glowing with happiness. Mrs. Henderson nearly had a fit when she saw them arriving with messy hair and grass-stained clothes. "Good heavens, Richard, where have you been? You look like you rolled in the dirt." "We went to the park," Gabe answered proudly. "And I made a new friend. And I got to feed a duck," Jake chimed in, finished Peter. "And Daddy bought popcorn for everyone," Jake concluded. Mrs. Henderson looked at Richard with an expression mixing disbelief and disapproval. "Richard, these children need a bath urgently, and so do you." For the first time, Richard found humor in the situation. "Then let's all take a bath. Constance, can you stay a bit longer today? I'd like to talk about some changes I've been thinking of making." Constance agreed, and while Richard bathed the children, another new experience for him, she tidied the kitchen and prepared a simple dinner. When he came downstairs with the three clean, pajama-clad kids, he found the table set warmly, with lit candles and soft music playing. "How lovely, Constance," exclaimed Peter. "Much better than eating at that huge table," Gabe agreed. During dinner, Richard made a proposal he'd been considering since morning. "Constance, I want to make serious changes in this house, and I need your help for that." "What kind of changes, Mr. Richard?" "First, I want you to accept being more than a cleaner, not a nanny, as you made clear, but a family consultant. Someone who helps me turn this house into a real home." Constance set down her fork and looked at him seriously. "Mr. Richard, that would mean you'd have to change too, a lot. I know, and I'm willing. It would be a complete routine shift. You'd have to spend more time at home, be part of the children's lives, step back a little from business." "My business won't end if I work 8 hours a day instead of 12. And if it does, at least I'll have been a real father." The conversation was interrupted by Gabe, who let out a big yawn. "Daddy, are you going to read us a bedtime story tonight too?" Richard looked at Constance, who smiled encouragingly. "Of course, son. What story do you want to hear?" "The one about the duckling who found his family." That night, for the second time in his life, Richard read a story to his children. But this time was different. They snuggled up beside him in the big bed, interrupting with questions and comments. It was messy, took forever, and was absolutely perfect. When he finally tucked them into their cribs, Jake held his hand. "Daddy, will you be here when we wake up?" The question broke Richard's heart. How many mornings had he left for work before they woke up? How many nights had he come home after they'd fallen asleep? "Yes, son. Daddy will be here." "Promise?" "I promise." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. The next morning, Richard kept his promise. He was in the kitchen at 7, trying to make breakfast when the triplets came downstairs. Constance arrived minutes later to the most heartwarming scene, the millionaire businessman attempting toast while 3 pajama-clad boys helped by smearing jelly all over the counter. "Good morning, family," she said, smiling. "Auntie Connie, Daddy's learning to make breakfast," Peter announced proudly. "And he's doing very well," Constance lied diplomatically, eyeing the slightly burnt toast. Richard laughed at himself. "I still have a lot to learn." That morning, Richard called his assistant and cancelled all his meetings for the week. It was time for structural changes in his professional life so he could be present in his personal one. "Mr. Thompson, may I ask why these sudden changes?" the assistant questioned, clearly concerned. "Because I've discovered there are things more important than business." The first big test of the new routine came days later. Richard had promised to take the boys to the zoo, but got an urgent call about a serious problem at one of his construction sites. It was the kind of situation that would normally make him cancel any personal commitment. Constance watched as he spoke on the phone, seeing the internal struggle reflected in his expression. The triplets waited eagerly, already dressed and ready for their outing. "Daddy, can we go see the animals now?" asked Gabe, tugging on his father's pants. Richard covered the phone with his hand. "Just one more minute, son." But the issue at the construction site was complex, and the conversation dragged on. The children began to grow restless, and Constance saw disappointment creeping into their little eyes. Then Richard did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He cut off the engineer mid-explanation. "Jake, are you at the site right now?" "Yes, Mr. Thompson." "Then you handle it. That's what I pay you for. Trust your judgment and send me a report at the end of the day." "But sir, this is a multi-million-dollar decision, and you're a trained engineer with 15 years of experience. Handle it." Richard hung up and turned to his children. "Now, let's go see the animals." The joy on their faces was worth more than any financial profit. Constance smiled approvingly, noticing that Richard was truly shifting his priorities. The zoo trip was an absolute success. The triplets were fascinated by the animals, asked 1,000 questions and ran from one exhibit to another. Richard discovered that his children were curious, bright, and full of personality. "Daddy, why does the elephant have such a big nose?" asked Jake. "So it can reach things from far away like an extra arm," Richard explained, recalling a documentary he'd seen years ago. "That's so cool. I wish I had a nose like that." "What for?" "To grab cookies from the top shelf without climbing on a chair." Richard's laughter echoed through the zoo, making other visitors smile. He was realizing that being a father could be fun, not just a heavy responsibility. By evening, when they returned home, they found Mrs. Henderson in an unusual fluster. She'd spent the day fielding calls from the company, suppliers, and clients, trying to reach Richard. "Richard, where were you? So many people have been trying to get hold of you." "Jack from the site called 5 times. "And what did you tell them?" "That you were busy with family matters, but they insisted it was urgent." Richard picked up the phone and called the engineer back. "Jake, Richard here. How was the situation resolved?" "Mr. Thompson, we did exactly as you instructed. We hired the structural reinforcement company, and the problem is being fixed. It should be done by Friday." "Great. And the cost?" "Within the emergency budget." "Perfect. Anything else?" "No, sir. I was just nervous about making the call myself." "Jake, you made the right call. Trust yourself more." When he hung up, Richard realized something important. The world hadn't ended because he'd spent a day away from the office. His employees were capable and could solve problems without his constant oversight. "Constance," he said, finding her helping the children take off their shoes, "I think you were right about me needing to learn to delegate." "You're discovering you can trust people," she replied with a smile. "And I'm discovering my children are far more interesting than any business meeting." That night, Richard started a new tradition in the house: family dinner time. No TV, no phone, just conversations about everyone's day. He learned that Peter was the most observant of the three, Gabe the dreamer, and Jake the most inquisitive. "Daddy," Peter said during dinner, "why didn't you eat with us before?" The child's direct question caught him off guard. "Because I worked too much, son." "But do you work less now?" "I'm learning to work in a different way." "What way?" "A way that gives me more time to spend with you." Gabe clapped his little hands. "That's great. It's so much more fun when you're here." Those simple words from a 3-year-old made Richard Thompson understand something no business consultant had ever managed to teach him. True success wasn't measured just in dollars. The following weekend, Richard made a decision that even surprised Constance. He decided to take the boys to meet her family in Louisiana. "Mr. Richard, you don't have to do this," she protested. "It's far different from what you're used to." "That's exactly why I want my kids to see different realities, and I want to meet the people who raised such a special woman like you." The trip to New Orleans was the first real adventure Richard had with his sons. On the plane, they pressed their faces to the window, fascinated by the clouds and the view from above. Gabe asked if they could touch the clouds. Peter wondered why the houses looked so small, and Jake was intrigued by how the plane worked. Richard answered every question with a patience he didn't even know he had. Being fully present with the kids without the pressure of work was becoming more and more natural. "Daddy, will Auntie Connie's grandma like us?" Gabe asked, a little worried. "Of course she will, son. You're impossible to resist." "How do you know?" "Because I couldn't resist you." Constance smiled, listening to the conversation. Richard was transforming right before her eyes, discovering fatherhood like it was a thrilling new adventure. Miss Dorothy, Constance's mother, welcomed them with a warmth that melted any social barriers immediately. She was a lively 70-year-old woman, small but full of energy, with a smile that lit up the entire simple house in the Trem neighborhood. "These are the boys my daughter talks about so much," she exclaimed, opening her arms to the triplets. The house was even simpler than Constance's in New York City, but it overflowed with life and joy. Constance's nephews, Matthew, Mark, and Marcel, treated the triplets like little brothers, teaching them games, showing them around the neighborhood, telling them stories. Richard watched in fascination as his sons quickly adapted to this completely different world. They played on the dirt roads, ate fruit straight from the trees, and helped Miss Dorothy prepare a Cajun dinner. "Mr. Richard," the older woman said, as she carefully prepared a rich seafood stew, "my daughter tells me you're learning how to be a father." "It's true, Miss Dorothy. It's never been easy for me. Nobody's born knowing how. You learn from your kids. They're the best teachers there are." "How so?" "They teach you to love without conditions, to have patience, to find wonder in the little things. Just look at your boys playing over there," she said, pointing to the backyard where the triplets were laughing and playing Ring Around the Rosie with their cousins. Richard looked and saw his sons completely at home, laughing loudly, covered in dirt, utterly happy. It was a different kind of joy than what they showed with expensive toys or fancy outings. It was pure, simple, real happiness. "Miss Dorothy, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course, son." "How did you raise such good kids all alone and with so little money?" The question made her smile wisely. "Money helps, but it doesn't build character. Love, boundaries, and example do. My kids always knew they were loved, always had clear rules, and always saw me working honestly. And what if I had a lot of money but didn't know how to show love? That would be the worst of all worlds. A child without love grows into an empty adult, no matter how much money they have." That night, Richard slept in a single bed in Constance's nephew's room, while the triplets shared a mattress in her room with Miss Dorothy. It was the complete opposite of the luxury they were used to, but everyone slept better than in their imported designer beds. The next day, Constance took Richard and the boys to see Grand Isle Beach. It was the first time the triplets had seen the ocean, and their reaction was unforgettable. They ran into the water shouting with joy, built sandcastles, and collected seashells. Richard, who hadn't set foot on a beach in over 10 years, rediscovered the simple pleasure of feeling the sand between his toes and the sea breeze on his face. He played with his sons in the water, helped build castles, and chased them along the shore. "Daddy, can we live here?" asked Jake, burying his feet in the sand. "Why do you want to live here, son?" "Because here, you smile more." The child's innocent observation hit Richard hard. It was true. Far from the pressures of business, the showiness of Greenwich, and the weight of social obligations, he was truly relaxed and happy. "Constance," he said as they watched the children play, "thank you for bringing me here." "Why, Mr. Thompson?" "Because you showed me what a real family looks like, how to be happy with little, how to love without complications. You can have that in New York City too. You don't need to change places. You need to change your heart." "How do I do that?" "Keep doing what you're doing, prioritizing what really matters." On the way back to New York City, Richard was determined to make even deeper changes. The trip had been a complete revelation about what truly mattered in life. On the plane, Gabe fell asleep in his lap. Peter rested his head on his arm, and Jake held his hand. Constance smiled from the seat beside them, watching the peaceful family scene. "Constance," Richard whispered, careful not to wake the children, "I want to propose something to you." What is it? I want you to come live with us permanently, not as an employee, but as part of the family. Your nephews can move to New York City. They can attend the best schools. Your mother can come too, if she'd like. Constance was silent for a long moment. Mr. Thompson, that's very generous, but it's not generosity. It's necessity. My children need you, and I've learned to need you too. You taught us how to be a family. And if it doesn't work out, it will, because now I know what really matters. Back in New York City, Richard made radical changes to his routine. He cut his work hours to 6 a day, delegated more responsibilities to his managers, and turned his house into a real home. The first change was in the decor. He replaced the artwork with family photos, filled the house with the boys' toys, and turned one of the guest rooms into a playroom. The mansion lost its showroom feel and came to life. Mrs. Henderson didn't approve of the changes. Richard, this house looks like an amusement park. What if you have important guests? They'll see a happy family lives here, he replied, watching the triplets playing freely in the living room. The second change was professional. Richard promoted his most capable managers, hired new talent, and created a structure that ran without his constant oversight. He discovered that delegating not only worked, it made the company more efficient. Mr. Thompson, his accountant said during a meeting, the quarterly numbers are excellent. The company has never run better. How is that possible when I'm working less? Because decisions are made faster now, employees feel more valued, and there are fewer administrative bottlenecks. Richard realized that his obsession with controlling everything had actually been an obstacle to the company's growth. The third change was the most important. He began to truly know his children as unique individuals. Peter was the artist of the family, always drawing and creating stories. Gabe was the explorer, curious about how things worked. Jake was the diplomat, always trying to resolve conflicts between his brothers. Constance, Richard said one night after putting the boys to bed, I never imagined being a father could be so rewarding. You just needed to give yourself a chance. And what if I hadn't met you? What if I'd stayed the way I was? But you did meet me, and you changed. That's what matters. However, not everything was smooth sailing. Richard's transformation faced resistance in some circles. Clients complained about his reduced availability, business partners questioned his priorities, and Greenwich's high society gossiped about the eccentricities of the millionaire who now took his children to play in the public park. Richard, one of his partners said during a business dinner, you're missing important opportunities. That project in Las Vegas, I'm not missing them, I'm choosing, Richard replied. I choose to be present in my children's lives. But think of their future, the money you're leaving on the table. Their future doesn't depend solely on money. It depends on having a father who knows them, loves them, and is there for them. The conversation left an awkward silence at the table. Richard realized he was distancing himself from a world he once considered essential, but now found empty and meaningless. The real test of their new family life came when Margaret, his ex-wife, decided to return from England. She appeared at the mansion on a Saturday afternoon, as elegant and determined as ever. Richard, I need to talk to you. Alone. The children recognized her immediately, but their reaction wasn't what Margaret expected. Instead of running to hug her, they hid behind Constance, uncertain and fearful. Mommy? Peter asked hesitantly. Yes, my love. Mommy's back. But when Margaret moved to embrace them, they shrank back even further. The coldness of their separation had left deep scars on the children's emotional memories. In the office, Margaret got straight to the point. Richard, I want to come back. I want to rebuild our family. Margaret, you left us over a year ago. You walked away without looking back. I was confused, depressed. England did me good. I had time to think. Now I know what I want. And what is that? My children back, my marriage back, our life back. Richard studied her with curiosity, as if seeing a stranger. The woman he'd been married to for 8 years now seemed completely different. Or perhaps it was he who had changed entirely. Margaret, our children barely recognized you. Do you know why? Because they're still young, they forget quickly. No, because you were never truly present in their lives, just like I wasn't. That's ridiculous. I took care of them. You fulfilled obligations. It's not the same thing. Margaret glanced around the office, noticing the changes in the decor. Photos of the children had replaced business awards, and their drawings were pinned to the fine wood-paneled walls. Richard, what happened to you? This house is unrecognizable. And who is that woman with the children? That woman's name is Constance, and she taught our children how to be happy. An employee? A person who knows how to love. The conversation grew tense when Margaret learned that Constance wasn't just a nanny, but had become a mother figure to the children. Richard, this is unacceptable. My children can't have another woman playing the role of their mother. They needed someone who would. You weren't here, but now I am. Now might be too late. Constance, who had stayed with the children in the living room, sensed the tension coming from the study. The triplets were restless, picking up on the heavy atmosphere that always followed Margaret's presence. "Auntie Connie, is Mommy staying?" asked Gabe, clinging to her skirt. "I don't know, sweetheart. That's for your parents to decide. But if she stays, will you leave?" The question broke Constance's heart. It was exactly what she feared. Margaret's return would mean her separation from the children she had learned to love as her own. "Do you want me to stay?" "We do," the three shouted in unison. "You're our heart, Mom," said Jake, using an expression he'd learned from Miss Dorothy. In the study, the argument escalated. Margaret demanded Constance be fired immediately, but Richard refused outright. "She stays," he said firmly. "The children need her. The children need their real mother. The real mother is the one who cares, who loves, who's present. Constance has been more of a mother to them in 6 months than you were in 3 years." The accusation hit Margaret hard. She knew it was true, but wasn't willing to admit it. "Richard, if you don't let that woman go, I'll take legal action. I have rights over my children. Do what you must, Margaret, but I won't take away from my kids the person who taught them to smile again." The fight was interrupted by the triplets themselves, who came running into the study. Constance tried to hold them back, but they slipped past. "Daddy, why are you shouting?" asked Peter, his eyes brimming with tears. Richard knelt to their level. "I'm sorry, son. Daddy and Mommy were talking about grown-up things." "Are you fighting because of us?" asked Jake, ever perceptive. "No, sweetheart. No one's fighting because of you." Gabe timidly approached Margaret. "Mommy, are you going to live here again?" Margaret knelt and tried to hug him, but he hesitated. "Yes, my love, Mommy wants to come home." "And will Auntie Connie stay too?" The question left Margaret speechless. She glanced at Richard, who crossed his arms, unwavering. "We'll see, Gabe," she finally said. But the vague answer didn't convince the children. They were little, but not foolish. They sensed the tension and knew when adults weren't being entirely honest. That night, after Margaret left with a promise to return the next day, Richard spoke at length with Constance. "I don't know what to do," he confessed. "Legally, Margaret has rights to the children, but emotionally, they're attached to you. Mr. Richard, if your ex-wife wants to come back, maybe it's best I step aside. The children need their real mother." "You are their real mother. Margaret just gave birth to them. But she's their biological mother. That comes first. Constance, you saved my kids. You saved me too. I won't let anyone destroy our family." "Our family?" "Yes. Because that's what we are now. A family." The next morning, Margaret returned with a different proposal. She'd spent the night thinking and realized she needed a more strategic approach. "Richard, I want to propose an agreement." "What kind of agreement?" "I'll move back in, but I'll accept keeping Constance as staff, as long as she understands her place." Richard saw the trap immediately. Margaret wanted to regain control of the family, but would tolerate Constance only as a subordinate, not a mother figure. And what would her place be? Staff, housekeeper, maybe a nanny if needed. But I'm the children's mother, and that must be clear. Margaret, you can't just come back and expect everything to be as it was. Too much has changed. I've changed too, Richard. I'm willing to be a better mother. Prove it." How? Spend the week with the kids, without Constance around. Show you can take care of them, connect with them, make them happy. Margaret accepted the challenge, confident she could win back her children quickly. Constance reluctantly stepped away, returning to her home in Brooklyn while awaiting the results of the test. The first day was a disaster. Margaret tried to enforce the strict routine that had worked before the separation, but the children resisted. They'd grown used to Constance's flexibility and warmth, and their biological mother's military approach left them stressed. "I don't want to take a bath now," Gabe cried when Margaret tried to organize them for their bath at 6 on the dot. "Gabe, it's bath time." Then dinner, brushing teeth and bed. "But Auntie Connie lets us play a little longer." "I'm not Auntie Connie, I'm your mother, and we have rules." The second day was worse. The kids kept asking where Constance was, refused to eat the food Margaret made, and cried over everything. Richard watched with a heavy heart. He wanted this to work, wanted Margaret to connect with their children, but he saw her repeating the same mistakes. "Margaret," he said on the third day, "you need to understand the kids have changed. They need affection, not just structure." "I am being affectionate. You're being efficient. It's not the same." "Richard, they'll get used to me again. It's just a matter of time." But time was working against Margaret. Each day, the children grew more withdrawn, sadder, missing Constance more, and Richard saw his happy family unraveling again. On the fourth day, Peter got sick. He developed a high fever and became listless. Margaret cared for him technically, gave medicine, checked his temperature, followed all the doctor's orders. But Peter cried and asked for Auntie Connie. "I want Auntie Connie," he sobbed. "Peter, Mommy's here. Mommy's taking care of you." "But I want Auntie Connie. She sings to me when I'm sick." Margaret didn't know how to sing to children. She'd never learned lullabies, never discovered the healing power of a child's song. She tried humming a pop tune, but Peter cried harder. It was Richard who called Constance. "Please come, Peter's sick and he only wants you." Constance arrived in 15 minutes. When she walked into the room, Peter stopped crying instantly. Jake and Gabe, who'd been worried about their brother, ran to hug her. "Auntie Connie, you came back!" they exclaimed in relief. Constance sat on the bed beside Peter and began humming the same song she'd sung on that first day. The fever didn't magically break, but the boy calmed, relaxed, and for the first time in 4 days, smiled. Margaret watched from the doorway, a mix of jealousy, defeat, and, for the first time, understanding stirring inside her. She was seeing with her own eyes the bond Constance had with the children. It wasn't just about competence or efficiency. It was pure, real love. "Richard," she whispered, pulling him into the hallway, "we need to talk." "About what?" "About me being a terrible mother." The admission caught Richard off guard. It was the first time he'd heard Margaret acknowledge her shortcomings as a mother. "Margaret..." "No, Richard, let me say this. These 4 days made me realize something I didn't want to admit. I never knew how to be a real mother. I always treated the kids like projects to manage, not people to love." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I saw how that woman cares for our children. She loves them in a way I never could. And they love her too." Richard stayed silent, waiting for Margaret to continue. "I want to come back, Richard. But not to push Constance away. I want to come back to learn from her, to finally be the mother our children deserve." The proposal was unexpected and complex. Margaret wanted to return, but she recognized she needed Constance's help to connect with her own children. "Margaret, would this even work?" "I don't know, but I want to try. For the first time in my life, I really want to try to be a mother." That night, Richard, Margaret, and Constance had a long, difficult conversation. Margaret proposed an unusual arrangement. She would return home, but as a mother in training, with Constance guiding her on how to build emotional bonds with the children. "Constance," Margaret said, swallowing her pride, "can you teach me how to be a mother to my own children?" Constance was surprised by the humility of the question. "Miss Margaret, I'm no teacher. I just do what I feel in my heart." "Then teach me how to feel it in my heart too." The arrangement was unconventional, but everyone agreed. Margaret moved back into the mansion, but in a completely different dynamic. Instead of competing with Constance, she observed, learned, and slowly began to develop her own way of showing love to the children. The first few months were hard. The kids still preferred Constance, and Margaret often felt like a stranger in her own home. But she persisted, guided by Constance's endless patience and supported by Richard's understanding. "Why does Peter like you more than me?" Margaret asked one day, after seeing her son run into Constance's arms instead of hers. "Because I was here when he needed me. Love is built day by day, Miss Margaret. It doesn't happen overnight." "How do I build it?" "Stop trying to be perfect. Be real. Kids can tell when we're being fake." Slowly, Margaret began to lower her guard. She stopped trying to impress the kids with elaborate activities and simply started being present. She sat on the floor to play, laughed when they made a mess, comforted them when they cried. The turning point came when Gabe scraped his knee playing in the garden. Instinctively, he ran to Constance first, as he always did, but this time Margaret was closer. "Mommy, it hurts!" Gabe cried, reaching his little arms out to her. Margaret scooped him up, and instead of rushing for medicine or calling the doctor, she simply comforted him. She kissed the scrape, whispered soothing words, and held him until he stopped crying. "Mommy makes it go away," Gabe murmured, resting his head on her chest. It was the first time one of the children had come to her on their own for comfort. Margaret cried with emotion, realizing she had finally shared a moment of true connection with her son. "Constance," she said later, "thank you for teaching me that love is shown in small moments." "You're learning." The children can feel the difference. Indeed, the children began responding to Margaret differently. They didn't abandon Constance. She remained their emotional anchor, but they started including their birth mother in their moments of affection and play. Richard watched the changes with growing satisfaction. His family was finally becoming what he had always dreamed of, a core of love, support, and genuine happiness. But not everything was smooth. Greenwich's high society still raised eyebrows at the Thompsons' family dynamic. A household with a father, mother, and a black second mother sparked gossip and speculation. "Richard," a neighbor said during a barbecue, "isn't this situation in your home causing misunderstandings?" "What kind of misunderstandings?" "Well, you know, a single woman living in a married couple's home with children." Richard felt anger rise in his chest. "The situation in my home is that my children are happy and well cared for. If that bothers anyone, the problem isn't mine." The gossip and criticism didn't affect Richard, but they began to bother Constance. She felt uncomfortable being seen as an intruder or opportunist by people who didn't know the real story. "Mr. Thompson," she said one day, "maybe it's best if I look for another job. People are talking." "Constance, do you care what these people think?" "I care about what it might do to your family. My family is fine. We're all happy. The rest doesn't matter." "But the children might suffer from the comments when they grow up." "The children will grow up knowing they were loved by many people. That's a privilege, not a problem." Richard was right. The triplets, now 4 years old, were well-balanced, affectionate, and secure children. They called Richard Daddy, Margaret Mommy, and Constance Heart Mom. To them, having so much love was completely natural. The family dynamic solidified when Margaret became pregnant again. This time, instead of seeing the pregnancy as an obligation or a project, she was genuinely excited to meet the new baby. "Constance," she said during her 6th month, "I want you to help me care for the baby from the start. I don't want to repeat the mistakes I made with the triplets." "Of course, Margaret, we'll take care of her together. And stop calling me Mom. We're family." The birth of Sophie brought the family even closer. Margaret, guided by Constance, was able to establish a deep connection with her daughter from the beginning. She breastfed, sang, played, and embraced a motherhood she never knew she had. The triplets adored their baby sister and became her little protectors. Richard melted watching his 4 children playing together, with Margaret and Constance caring for them all with equal affection. "Richard," Margaret said one night as they watched the children sleep, "thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for coming back willing to change. If it weren't for Constance, I never could have done it." Constance saved our family in more ways than one. The Thompson family became an unusual but functional example of how different forms of love could coexist. Richard continued to grow as a balanced father and businessman. Margaret flourished as a devoted mother, and Constance found the family she had always dreamed of. 5 years later, when the triplets were in school and Sophie was taking her first steps, Richard reflected on the journey that had brought them here. "Constance," he said one Sunday morning as they prepared breakfast for the whole family, "do you know you completely changed our lives?" "We changed each other, Mr. Thompson. That's what family does." The children came running down to the kitchen as they did every Sunday morning, Sophie in Margaret's arms, the triplets arguing over who would help make pancakes, the table set simply and with love. It was a scene that could happen in any family home, but to Richard, it represented the greatest achievement of his life. He had discovered that true success wasn't measured in money or professional recognition, but in the quality of the relationships we build. "Daddy," said Jake, now 8, "can I invite my friends for lunch?" "Of course, son. Our home always has room for more." It was true. The mansion in Greenwich had become a place where everyone felt welcome. The children's friends, Constance's relatives, less judgmental neighbors, all found a warm and genuine atmosphere there. The transformation had been slow but steady. Richard had learned that being a father was a privilege, not an obligation. Margaret had discovered that motherhood was about connection, not control. And Constance had found a family that loved her exactly as she was. 3 years later, when Richard turned 50, the family threw a party that perfectly represented everything they had built together. It wasn't an extravagant Greenwich celebration, but a warm gathering with the people who truly mattered. Miss Dorothy came from New Orleans with Constance's nephews, now thriving teenagers studying in New York City with Richard's help. True friends, the kids' classmates, neighbors who had moved past their initial prejudices, they all celebrated not just the birthday, but the unusual and wonderful family the Thompsons had become. "Richard," said Dr. Helen, the child psychologist who had witnessed the entire transformation, "your children are the most well-adjusted kids I know. You've built something very special. It wasn't us. It was Constance who taught us everything. It was all of your love. Everyone contributed in their own way." During the party, Richard watched his children playing freely with their friends. Jake, now 11, had inherited his entrepreneurial streak, but used it to organize games and help his friends. Peter, with his artistic sensitivity, painted portraits of all the guests. Gabe remained the explorer, fascinated by how things worked. And Sophie, at 6, was the family's little diplomat, mediating conflicts and spreading smiles. "Constance," Richard called, stepping away from the festivities, "I want to talk to you." They sat in the garden, where it had all begun years earlier when she had found 3 boys crying and desperate. "Remember the first day?" he asked. "How could I forget? 3 little ones needing love. You saved them. You saved me too. We saved each other, Mr. Thompson." "Constance, after all these years, I think you can just call me Richard." She smiled. "All right." "Richard, I want to make you an offer." "What offer?" "I want you to be the children's official godmother. I want your name on all their documents as their second guardian. I want you legally recognized as part of this family." Constance was moved. "Richard, that's not necessary." "It is. For me, for Margaret, and especially for the kids. You're their heart mum, and it should be official." The arrangement was finalized a few months later with a simple but meaningful ceremony. Richard, Margaret, and Constance signed papers formalizing shared custody of the children, ensuring Constance had legal rights and responsibilities for them. "Now we're officially a crazy family," Margaret joked as she signed the documents. "The best crazy family in the world," Richard added. The years that followed were filled with growth and happiness for everyone. The children flourished extraordinarily, secure and loved by multiple parental figures. Richard successfully balanced his professional and personal life, becoming a respected businessman and a present father. Margaret blossomed as a mother and wife, discovering parts of herself she never knew existed. And Constance found the life purpose she had always searched for. The Thompson family became known in New York City not for wealth or extravagance, but as an example of how different forms of love could harmoniously coexist. Richard was often invited to speak about leadership and family life, always crediting his personal transformation to the lessons of a humble woman who knew how to love unconditionally. Success in business is important, he would say in his talks, but success in family life is essential. And I've learned that family isn't just who you're born with, it's who chooses to stay. On a special Sunday afternoon, when Jake turned 15, the family gathered in the backyard of their home. The children had grown up, but they kept the closeness and affection that Constance had taught them since they were little. "Mom Constance," said Jake, using the sweet title he had created, "thank you for teaching us how to be a real family." "You taught me too, Jake. You taught me that family is chosen with the heart." Richard watched the scene with his chest full of gratitude. 15 years earlier, he had been a lost man, disconnected from everything that truly mattered. Now, surrounded by people he loved and who loved him back, he understood he had found the most precious treasure there was, a family united by true love. "Constance," he said, putting his arm around her shoulders, "thank you for doing the impossible." What was impossible? Turning an empty house into a home full of love, turning strangers into a family, turning a lost man into a fulfilled father. Constance smiled, watching the children she had helped raise playing happily in the garden. "It wasn't impossible, Richard. It was just love. Love always finds a way." And indeed it had. Against all odds, against all prejudices, against all social conventions, love had created a unique, strong and true family. A family that proved what really matters isn't where we come from, but where we go together. End of story. Now tell me what you thought of this story of family triumph. Do you believe love can really break social barriers like it did for Richard and Constance? Share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories like this one.